We've been talking a lot about Bill 96 today. I want to get a different view, a little context here from Robert Leckie, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Law at McGill, who is posting about this and has been on Twitter. He was also at the rally for Bill 96 over the weekend. Dean Leckie, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about what you wrote today that I read on Twitter. I want to just read this. I'm sort of quoting. It says, "We move from the idea of French being the common language of Quebec," and that, of course, is what the government's mantra seems to be doing to justify this Bill 96, "to the idea that French is what needs to be used even when a doctor is communicating with a patient. That is not the common language. That's a very intimate space." So what are we missing here? The government keeps saying common language, yet at the same time, yesterday the Premier at a press conference said, no, this will not change anything with respect to the language you can be spoken to if, for example, you're in a hospital.
It's actually not quite what the Premier said. The Premier said this wouldn't affect the delivery of health care to Anglophones or to people in English. And what I was trying to get at in Twitter, Bill 96 essentially tells members of the civil administration, as it calls it, that they need to speak French. And so Bill 96 sends a message that if you're a doctor or a social worker and you speak Ukrainian, you have a patient or client who speaks the same language, Bill 96 tells you that you need to be communicating in French. And so it may be that the classic healthcare services assured to English-speaking Quebecers will continue. But Bill 96 is sending a general message that people are not supposed to be using other languages.
Okay, but now I'm further confused. If that's the case, and you're an Anglo, and you just heard what the Premier said yesterday, wouldn't you assume that it would be okay to speak English to whoever you're dealing with in a hospital?
So there's a couple of... The law is not as clear as I would like it to be, and the Premier's comments don't change the law. What the law provides is that people need to speak French. The law provides an exception where a health-related reason justifies it, but the law seems to make clear that any kind of exception to the imperative of using French needs to be individualized rather than systemic, and could well be interpreted narrowly. And the Premier referred to a whole separate statute about access to health care in English, but even the guarantee he was referring to there is one that's limited by the health establishment's available resources. And so, it's not an absolute guarantee either. To me, what's worrisome is it's not quite clear, and the answers from Quebec City seem to change, and we're sort of pressing ahead with adopting this law, but there are a lot of doubts about what it's going to mean.
The thing that comes to mind for me, Dean Leckie, right away is how would it be determined what qualifies as an exception, and wouldn't time be of the essence often in these circumstances?
Yeah, it could be, but if you picture, it wouldn't take more than a few medical or other health workers to be, professionally disciplined for having made the wrong call using French when maybe they, not using French when they should have, to lead people to be more reticent and perhaps diverge on the side of caution. And there could be, communication failures as a result of that. It adds a level of complexity where fundamentally I think we'd want our health and social services providers to be trying to pursue simply the most effective delivery of services possible.
Clearly.
So in hearing what the Premier said yesterday, and obviously you did, and maybe we can play the clip, Brian. I'd like Dean Leckie to hear this again. Here's just in a nutshell what the Premier said. All right, and then I want you to tell me, because you're suggesting this is not very clear yet, I think people who hear this for the first time think to themselves, well, this sounds like he's basically saying all our fears have been allayed here. Take a listen to this.
I want to be very clear. There's no change at all in the actual situation of services given to Anglophones and immigrants in English in our healthcare system. That's clear.
Okay. He says it's clear. Is it clear in your mind?
Well, it's not clear. I mean, all those services are still going to be subject to Bill 96's obligation to communicate in French. The scope of the exception for health remains unclear, but could be quite narrow. And he also referred to, as I said, a separate statute about delivery of health services in English, but that might be limited in its application to the sort of historical Anglos we sometimes talk about. And even then, it's limited to circumstances where the kind of institution's resources permit it. What the Premier didn't address head on was Bill 96's potential to instruct health and social services people not to use a language in which they could communicate effectively with their clients.
Even in situations of life and death?
Well, I think the health exception would excuse using a language other than French in situations of life and death. But lots of people in non-life and death situations like to use the most effective language that they and their social services providers share.
Yeah. What would you like to see, or what would make you more comfortable to have written into this bill? Because apparently there's some phantom amendment that we keep hearing about, and no one's been actually able to find it, that suggests that this is not going to be an issue. Have you heard anything about that? Do you know what that's about?
Well, there was an amendment, I think, that was in committee that made a link to Section 15 in the law respecting health services in English, and I don't think that satisfies all the worries. If you want to say what would reassure me more, I would say the government knows very well how to exempt broad sectors of the public service from a particular law. Bill 21, the secularism law from 2019, applies to schools, not to daycares, not to the healthcare sector. So the government knows how to draw the lines when it wants to. And so if we wish to do it here, it could be very clear that this new obligation for the government to speak French when speaking to people didn't apply in health and social services. It could totally do that.
All right. And what about, just as a final question, do you believe, as we keep hearing from people, the day this thing becomes law, it'll be challenged in the courts immediately if it stays as is?
I do suspect, I do think there are groups that are already looking. There's obvious constitutional violations in respect of the court system and some other things as well. So, yeah, I think it won't be long at all before the first challenges come.
Okay. Dean Leckie, I want to thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciate it this afternoon.
My pleasure. Good to speak.
Thank you. Robert Leckie, he is the Dean of the Faculty of Law at McGill University, raises some good points. And as he said, I love what he said at the end, this idea that, hey, if you want to take all the maybes out of this, you know what to do. You did it with Bill 21. It could be done with the healthcare sector in Bill 96 as well. It's not complicated.